If you desire to walk in alignment with your purpose, to live a life of joy, abundance, and fulfillment, you've come to the right place. This is Sarah Locke, and welcome to Purpose Unlocked. Hello, everyone. A few episodes ago, we talked about forgiveness and what that looks like and the benefits and how good that can be for us and not the person that wronged us. However, there are times in life when we go through an event and we feel like we've forgiven all of the people that we've needed to forgive, but we're still left with this horrible feeling inside. We can't make the pain go away. And we replay that situation in our brains over and over again, thinking, what could we have done differently? How could I have tried harder? Is there something that I could have done that would have led to a different outcome with all of this information that I know now? How would I reapply that and, you know, make it work out better? And what could I have done better? And if that's you and you're replaying those situations over and over again, I just want you to know that what you're feeling is guilt. And the person that you need to forgive is now yourself. The reason I say that is because I have absolutely been there, and I just wanted to open up this discussion to talk about what happened to me when I finally realized that it was actually myself that I had to forgive and what that can look like for you moving forward. So, if you watched the previous episode on forgiveness, you will have known that in order to forgive my ex-husband, I wrote him a really long letter, and that was really therapeutic for me. But afterwards, I still couldn't break this feeling of what could I have done better? Like, how could this have ended better for him? Because it was a situation where it really wasn't his fault. He became extremely mentally ill and decided he wanted basically nothing to do with like me or his friends or family. And but I kept thinking like I should have pushed harder at the doctors. I should have done this. I could have gotten him more help. I could have taken like maybe there were other legal avenues I could do because obviously like with HIPAA there wasn't a lot that I could do. And I was just beating myself up about it for a long time because he was a really great person and I just felt like what happened to him was so unfair. And on top of that, having been his wife, I had taken vows. I said, for better or worse, in sickness and health, I'm going to be there. And he was sick and I couldn't help him. And that's the part that like really killed me. Like I promised to be there when he was sick and like I couldn't. And our legal system doesn't really allow for that. Once someone decides that, you're not involved in their medical care, that's the law. That's how HIPAA works. So anyway, I did beat myself up about it for a really long time. And then I realized I was actually watching like a Netflix documentary. I think it was called Heal. And there was this woman that she was really struggling with the relationship that she had grown up with her mother and things like that. And one of the things I realized was that like she was struggling with guilt. And it was through watching it in someone else that I realized that that's what I was feeling in myself and that I was the person that I now had to forgive because it wasn't my fault. And so I think that if you're dealing with guilt, a lot of the time you have to realize that knowing what you know now isn't helpful in the past. And one of the ways that you can be I don't want to say letting yourself off the hook, but just forgiving yourself for everything that happened in the role that you played in it is by saying, I did the best I could with the information that I had at the time. And I had to say that to myself over and over and over again because I had, do I believe that I did the best I could with what I knew? Yeah, I did the best I could as a 26-year-old who was navigating this crazy medical and legal system for the first time ever. And I never wish that on absolutely anybody. Wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But that's what I learned was that I did the best I could with the information that I had at the time. And if you can look back and say, I did the best I could with the information that I had at the time. Did it work out how I wanted to? No. Did I make the wrong choice? Maybe. Were there things that I could have done better? Probably. But if you can forgive yourself and just know that you did the best you could with the information that you had, I want you to just keep repeating that to yourself and keep forgiving yourself on a daily basis. And if you need to use some of those forgiveness practices that we talked about, like writing a letter, you can even write a letter to yourself, to your younger self at that time, and say, I see you and I see the pain that you're going through. I see how everything in your life it feels like you're in turmoil and you're just fighting through every day trying to do your absolute best. And you know, I respect that you're doing the best you can even in your own emotional suffering. So anyway, if you can relate to any of that, I hope that you can use that as your mantra to forgive yourself moving forward because you did the best you could with the information that you had at the time.
Do you believe the feeling of guilt is solely a negative emotion, or can it serve a useful purpose? What did you learn from the experience of having to forgive yourself and the feeling of guilt?
That's a great question. Yes, I do think that as uncomfortable as guilt feels, it can definitely serve a positive purpose. Because let's be honest, sometimes you have to forgive yourself and it was straight up your fault. Sometimes, you didn't do the best that you could with the information that you had. And in those situations, I do feel like guilt is a good thing because it it will redirect you and it will help you make better decisions in the future. So if you did something to wrong someone that you knew was wrong at the time and you're feeling guilty about it, like good. You should feel guilty. Now, if you sit in the guilt and it turns into shame, and instead of it being I did something bad, it becomes I am bad. That becomes shame. And that's not what you want it to turn into. It should turn into I did something bad, and next time I'm definitely not going to make that mistake again. So that's why I think that guilt can actually be a really positive motivator for people to change the way that they're acting in the future.
How do you feel that forgiveness, either forgiving someone or forgiving yourself, and feelings of guilt, how do you believe that makes us better? Does that, can it make us better partners, parents, siblings?
Yeah, I think that I mean, I'll just start with as a parent. As a parent, especially, you kind of just feel like you're making mistakes all the time and you have to constantly forgive yourself. And sometimes I'll get really frustrated and have to remind myself, like, don't react poorly because Kingston is a baby. And, you can't get mad at him for being fussy because he's sick or he's tired or he's hungry or he has a stuffy nose. So there's definitely times where, you're going to feel feelings of guilt as a parent or as a spouse. And you just have to keep reminding yourself, like, all right, I'm going to forgive myself. I'm going to move on. Like, or I'm going to have learned from the last time that I did this and I'm going to react more positively this time. And I think that that process of being like, oh, I messed up, but I'm going to forgive myself and I'm going to do better next time. And you just have to keep doing that. I think if you keep making, even if it's just a baby step to be like, okay, this time I'm going to do a deep breathing exercise when I get frustrated, or I'm just going to take a deep breath and like put some music on. Like those are things that help me. And so I do think that if you're doing that on a regular basis as a parent or as a spouse, it's going to be positive, net positive for your relationship.
How do you know if you've held on to guilt for too long?
Well, like I said, I think that if you're holding on to guilt and it's becoming shame and it's going from I did something bad or I could have done better to I'm a horrible person, or in my case, like I was a terrible wife, or, I'm a terrible partner. For me, it didn't become shame. I didn't feel like I was bad. I felt like I could have done better. And in other situations, I I think I held on to the guilt for too long? I mean, probably because it was eating away at me. Like, and I'm sure that other people have felt that, whether it's like whether you've lost someone and you feel like you could have prevented it, or whether you're constantly overreacting to your spouse or your children. If you keep making those same mistakes over and over again, sometimes your guilt can shift from that guilt into shame because you feel like I keep messing up. And I think in those situations, that's when you need to step back and say, I can do better. And what are the avenues that I can take to relieve some of my stress in a healthy way, and then find other coping mechanisms so that instead of constantly feeling guilty because you're not showing up for the people that you love in the best way that you know that you can, you need to seek out other avenues, and those are some of the emotional intelligence tools that I teach in my classes.
And do you believe it's harder to forgive others or forgive yourself? And how does forgiving yourself differ from forgiving others?
I think for each person, it's going to be a lot different. And I think for each situation, it's going to be a lot different. So for me personally, I'll just speak to the two circumstances that I had spoken about in the previous forgiveness episode, the one being with my ex-husband. I think in that situation, it was way harder to forgive myself because, as I mentioned, he wasn't in his right mind. So even though I wrote him this letter of forgiveness, I almost didn't feel like it was ever his fault because it really wasn't his fault. Like the person that I married was no longer like there. So so even though I wrote him this letter of forgiveness, it was really more so like a therapeutic exercise and not necessarily because I like was blaming him. So in that situation, I really probably blamed myself a lot more. And that's why it was way harder to forgive myself because I was of sound mind and I kept thinking like there was something else that I could have done or I should have done sooner. And I just realized that like I can't keep beating myself up because I can't go back in time and save the situation. Um, and the other situation that I had mentioned with, um, so the other situation was me forgiving someone who, as a child, was very critical of my weight and had called me fat. And then like I kind of just like had body dysmorphia the rest of my life and actually started it became such a part of me that I just attributed it to my hormones and not to what had happened. And then I went through like this class and I had to do this whole like timeline and forgiveness exercise, and I'm thinking to myself like, oh, I already forgave my ex-husband, like who else do I have to forgive? And then like that situation came up and I was like, "Phew." And it was really, really hard for me to write that letter of forgiveness. Like I actually didn't want to write it. I had even told my husband at the time, I was like, I'm not writing that letter because this person doesn't deserve a single second more of my time. And and he was like, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds healthy. That sounds like you've forgiven and moved on. Great job. And like, and so I knew that it was still like living inside me. And I was like, ugh. And I didn't want to write it. Like I didn't want to spend the time to even think about it and forgive this person. So I think that in situations that go back to your childhood and some type of trauma that has just like lived so deep inside you for so long, it can be really, really, really hard to practice forgiveness in those situations. And you know, someone calling you fat isn't fun, but it's not like abuse. Like some people have gone through really bad things in their childhood that like I can't imagine having to forgive something for some of the other things that I've, heard other people have experienced. So I don't pretend to know what that would be like, but I would imagine like having to forgive and free yourself from that would be incredibly challenging. So if any of this resonates with you, I hope that you take the time to write those letters of forgiveness, whether it is to people that have wronged you or whether it's to yourself. And remember, you did the best that you could with the information that you had at the time. And even if you didn't, you can still do better next time. It's time to forgive yourself. It's time to be the best that you can. And it's time to move on and live your best life. And I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the precious gift of your time. If you found this helpful, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share with someone you love. Until next time, count your blessings, love yourself, and stay fabulous.